how we currently manage horses as a whole, we just chuck them out in a paddock and don't really think about what the consequences are for the soil. Equine Ecologist, it's basically a product of me marrying my two passions together, and also realising that there's a huge gap between all the knowledge, research and information that's out there, and actually applying it in real life, and actually bringing it to people who are actually managing their horses. Whatever decision we'd be making about the land, is that going to be beneficial to the horse or not? So I'm always looking for opportunities to give the horse a chance to be more natural, because horses naturally would be on these huge open plains.
And what can we do? What one thing can we do now, immediately, or later today, Annabelle, to immediately improve our paddock, not only for our horses, but for the land's sake as well? Hello and welcome to the Curious Equestrian podcast with me, Louise, and today's guest is Annabel Holmes, an equine ecologist. Annabelle has been a lifelong horse lover and has been fascinated by animal behaviour from a young age, teaching her chickens to do tricks, believe it or not, and learning different styles of horsemanship whenever she wasn't in school. She grew up living next to a nature reserve where she volunteered regularly and went on to study ecology at university. Annabelle's worked in conservation and consultant ecology sectors ever since, and has also studied equine behaviour and nutrition. Annabelle, we're thrilled to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me on. It's really exciting.
And recently, Annabelle started the Equine Ecologist, bringing her two passions together, nature and horses, to help people keep horses in the best way possible for the environment, for horse welfare and health. So Annabelle, first of all, so we can dive into your world, what does it mean and what is an equine ecologist?
So, Equine Ecologist, it's basically a product of me marrying my two passions together, and also realising that there's a huge gap between all the knowledge, research and information that's out there, and actually applying it in real life, and actually bringing it to people who are actually managing their horses. So, there's particular courses and things that you can study, but if you don't have the time for that, but you still want to do something for your horse's welfare and do something for the environment, that's where I come in as the equine ecologist, and I can sort of help you understand your land, specific to what you need and what your horses need, rather than subscribing to a particular type of method of doing things. I can help you find what's right for you.
And what is the day in the life of an equine ecologist like?
So at the minute I'm doing things a little bit part-time, because I'm a mum to a little 1-year-old. So I spend a lot of time running around after a tiny child. But in between that, I'm sort of building up my clients. So I'm going out surveying plants, doing soil testing, helping people understand their land, doing sort of free stuff. So I'm putting together a free guide, putting together my website, just sort of building up a bit of a knowledge base as well for horse owners. I'm hoping to be a bit of a hub of information for natural horse care and things.
And what inspired you to start your journey in equine ecology and eco-friendly land management practices?
So I studied ecology at university, and within that I did some animal behaviour things, and I think growing up I sort of thought there was your horse in a field and then there was nature, and they weren't really intertwined that much. Your horse would eat some stuff out on a hack, or you'd see a cool bit of wildlife in your field. But I sort of, growing up, everyone, chucked loads of fertiliser on their fields, or just chucked the horse out in the field and brought them in for the winter, and it wasn't really the done thing to mix the two, and I didn't really think that you could do that. But then I started working in conservation, and I realised a lot of nature reserves are using horses to manage nature, to manage the reserves for nature. And I sort of thought, oh, actually, there is a way that you can keep horses and nature happily together. And I sort of got more and more into studying the behaviour and different courses like the aquaculture course and horse track systems, and realised that there is a way to manage it so they both work together and produce some pretty beautiful results.
And just give us some of those examples of conservation horses and ponies, because so often we think of conservation grazing and sheep come to mind, whether it be at the National Trust or out on the mountains or on large estates. How good are horses at conservation?
So yeah, horses are actually quite good, especially hardy native types. They tend to be used on different reserves. A famous one would be the NEP rewilding project. They've got a herd of Exmoor ponies, and on one of the reserves I used to work on over in Wales, they've got some feral Welsh ponies, and what horses tend to do is they can trample things like bracken really well, and bracken tends to spread pretty quickly, and horses can get in there. They'll graze it as its toxicity reduces a bit later in the season, but they sort of flatten it all out, and then you compare it with the sheep and they'll come in and nibble down the other bits that the horses don't want. So sheep and horses work beautifully together, and cows as well, to maintain grassland habitats, which are actually really rare.
And how do we change the perception of horses? Because I think so often we hear, whether it be landowners or farmers or estate managers saying, don't want horses on our land, or don't want too many horses on our land because of the poaching of the ground. They wreck the fields. How do we change people's perception of horses on the land?
Yeah, so horses have got a little bit of a bad rep, and it's not the horses, it's the management of them. I think how we currently manage horses as a whole, not, there's a few people doing things differently, but as a whole, we just chuck them out in a paddock and don't really think about what the consequences are for the soil and the ground, and we don't think about the weather and what that means for the horse's nutrition as well. So what we need to look at is how we can manage how often our horses are on certain paddocks, perhaps with rotating them, and resting areas, and also learning how to manage bare ground, which is the main problem. It leads on to weeds like ragworts and dock and nettles. Also how horses poo in particular areas sort of creates concentrations of nutrients, and then they graze down big sort of lawn areas that deplete the nutrients there. So then you get this massive imbalance, and then you've got a lot of repair work to do, which is what I'm trying to help people to do, is to rebalance it.
And how easy is it to rebalance it and change the way that we graze our animals? And how do we right some of those problems, Annabelle, that you were just mentioning, like pooing in one area or grazing it down as a lawn?
So it sort of depends on the field. Some fields, are really lush because they might be converted cattle pasture, which contains these improved grass species like ryegrass that's been designed to fatten up cattle as quick as you can, and that leads on to problems with laminitis and things like that. So there's ways to manage that, or if you've just got loads of bare ground and you don't have much grass coming up, although with this weather this year I don't think there's many people complaining of that at the minute. I think everyone's just got a rush of whatever plants they've got because of all the rain and warmth, but there's ways of managing it. So you can think about controlling the mud. You can think about using different agricultural methods to fix what you've done, essentially. You can also use plants on your side. So there's certain plants that are slightly parasitic on these grasses, which can sort of hold them back a bit and give a chance for other plants to take over. There's lots of different things, and it sort of depends on your soil and your plants and what you want from it as well.
And equine ecology involves finding that balance that you mentioned between horse welfare and environmental sustainability. How does your approach address and bring together both of those approaches?
So I always make sure that I'm putting the horse's welfare and the land's welfare first. That's sort of how I look at it. So I think, is this, whatever decision we'd be making about the land, is that going to be beneficial to the horse or not? So I'm always looking for opportunities to give the horse a chance to be more natural, because horses naturally would be on these huge open plains of grass. They'd have different sort of terrains, they'd find trees, they'd go to water in different places. So it's about trying to mimic that and also benefiting the area that you do have, because we can't give them all that, unfortunately. It would be awesome if we could, but we can't. So it's about mimicking that natural way of living, because it's so beneficial for horses. It's good for their minds. There's some really cool studies that have come out showing that horses with better welfare have less accidents, and there's another one saying that they understand or learn their owners' cues quicker than horses that aren't kept out in a herd. So there's some really cool research coming out, and I think it's really important that we start taking this on and applying it to what we do.
And what can we do? What one thing can we do now, immediately, or later today, Annabelle, to immediately improve our paddock, not only for our horses, but for the land's sake as well, that will have an impact on the welfare of our horse? And like you say, we can't mimic the wilderness and give them acres and acres and acres to roam and rivers to wander and paddle through and mountains to climb. But what can we do to change a square or circular paddock to make it more interesting for them?
So there's all sorts you could do. Even if you don't want to just change your paddock, you can even take your horse out for a little bit of a foraging walk in hand, and just give them opportunities to just reach for some leaves out of a tree. It does wonders for their muscles, good stretch. It helps them shift their balance onto their hind legs, and gives them a chance to do all this selection and natural grazing behaviour. Because if you've got a field with just, ryegrass and clover, say, that's only 2 plants to choose from, and if they're quite high in sugar, it's sort of like being stuck in a sweet shop and you really want lunch. So if you take them out, they can go and select all these useful plants for themselves, and then maybe sort of longer term you could look at introducing these things into your own setup, which I can help with. I've also got a free guide that's coming out with the launch of my website that sort of helps you actually make a difference to not just to the environment, to the climate in general. And there's a few extra pointers in there, so that will be coming out hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
And talking of our horses and their paddocks, many horse owners strive to create a more sustainable environment for their animals. What are basic actionable steps that we can take, that any horse owner can take, to improve the paddock's ecological health as well?
So if you can, I would look into perhaps looking at whether you can rotate paddocks and give the grass a chance to rest, because overgrazing means stressed grass, and that produces a lot of sugar in the grasses. So not only is that harming your horse, but also you've got this stressed out grass that will be pulling loads of nutrients out of the soil. You'll also be compacting the soil with the horse's feet on the ground a lot. So if you do have the opportunity to give some areas, even if you're sort of using electric fencing to split up one pasture, just as long as they've got enough room, obviously, but just to give some grass a chance to bounce back, that can actually make quite a big difference to both your horse's health and to the soil and the grass health.
I want to myth bust something, Annabelle, if I may, pick your brains. I've got my horses on a track system and I've got an area, it's marshland, that we rested, and the grass has got very long. It's probably about knee to waist height in some places, and it's sort of paled out like hay, like hay does. The grass has dried out. At the moment, they're on their grazed down, sort of short and sharp, sugary grass. And I do want to rotate them and move them onto the longer grass, but some people have said that will be a limnitic hazard. Is that true? Or is the grass safer because it's longer and dried out?
Yeah, so it obviously depends on what species you've got there, but there is this general thought that you need to keep lamnitic horses and horses in general on really short pasture, which is kind of counterproductive because all this sugar is in the base of the plant, and horses' teeth are great at actually getting the whole plant up, so they're getting all of that sugar at the bottom. But if you're putting them in a pasture where they've got plenty of long fibrous grass, they're going to be snatching these long fibrous pieces, so like this dried out stuff, and they're going to fill up on that, which is actually lower on sugar, and they're going to feel, they're going to keep themselves full on lower sugar stuff, which actually is better for laminitis. But obviously it depends on the plant. It also depends on weather conditions and all sorts, but yeah, generally actually longer.
Really interesting. And you mentioned the weather. As an equine ecologist, has your job become even more challenging this year with the incredibly changeable and unseasonable weather that we've been having through the spring and the summer?
Yeah, so this year has been wet, but actually we need to start adapting to this, because this is just going to keep on happening. This is the result of climate change, and we need to really seriously think about what we're doing with our land. In the UK, 40% of the landscape is grassland, and it's something really tiny, like 2% is actually natural. That figure might not be exact, but there's so much of it is this sort of, designed grasses that just aren't suitable. If you've got a more natural grassland that you're grazing on, it's going to be more resilient to the conditions because it's adapted, the plants are adapted to the conditions that you've got. They're not going to be bringing up all this sugar, they're not going to be getting all these nutrients out of the soil, or it's a lot easier to manage in the wet or in different parts of the world. With wildfires, it's much easier to manage if you've got the right ecosystem in place, and again that also helps with all the carbon being sequestered, which basically means captured and stored back into the ground. If you've got the right plants in, it's going to be contributing to that rather than causing problems. If you've got bare soil, you're going to be making it worse. So it's just about trying to get it right. The better the biodiversity, it's intrinsically linked into the climate. So get the biodiversity right and you're making a difference to the climate, and you're going to be able to tolerate it all a lot easier, and you can be all smug when you've not got it all this horrible grass and you're trying to keep your horse inside and you don't know what to do.
And it's interesting, you've mentioned grass species as a key part of getting this right now, Annabelle, a few times, and just wondering about paddock grasses that play such a crucial role in the diet and well-being of our horses. Can you provide us with some guidance on selecting and managing certain grass species that promote both horse health and environmental vitality as well?
Yeah, so the best thing is to look at what is local to you, what species are local to you. So if you're in the Highlands or up in the hills of Wales, you wouldn't want to be putting in the same grasses that someone down the south of England or wherever. So I'd say first port of call is looking at what is naturally around you. So you can look at sort of local wildlife trusts, or I can research that for you, and then go from there with those. There are a few general species, like there's a group called fescues, which can be quite good, but sort of the more local, the more nature related, the better, because they tend to be better for your horses too. And sort of standard off the shelf paddock mixes generally don't tend to be great, because they are still putting that ryegrass and clover in.
How do we change a grass species? It seems like an awful lot of work. I know that my landowners that I rent from said that many moons ago they ploughed the land, changed the grass, and I just couldn't imagine the work involved. How easy is it to do, Annabelle, and also how worthwhile is it?
So first of all, it's very worthwhile, because you won't have to worry about bringing your horses in so much, and you're also doing a massive favour to nature. I'd say it depends on the site. If it's absolutely full of this ryegrass, it can be a challenge to get rid of, because it's meant to be able to tolerate a lot of things. So it can be a bit tricky to get rid of, but there's different methods of doing it. There's a sort of organs, blazing chemicals and machinery method. If you want it done more quickly and you just want to completely blank slate it, I wouldn't recommend that for many people, because that's quite aggressive, but in some cases it is needed. Or there's the more gentle methods, using plants, or using different grazing methods to suppress the growth of certain plants and then allow the other ones to grow at the right time of year. So yeah, again, very specific to each area.
And make the most of our little helpers and they'll enjoy the process as well. And talking of our little helpers, our horses, that we all spend most of the day thinking different things through, working out different arrangements for our horses. Should they be in? Should they be out? From my point of view, building track systems, me and my mum on 7 acres, try and manage the land and trying to give the horses that sense of direction and movement, instead of being within around traditional paddock that we see at most livery yards and at most, in most fields that we have to manage as horse owners. But looking at behaviour and welfare and assessing it is so important as horse owners, and they're essential to ensuring that our horses thrive on land and the environments that we give them. What are indicators or behaviours we should be looking out for on a daily basis when evaluating the well-being of our horses and whether they are happy in the environment that we've given them?
Yeah, so a lot of the time there's the red flags, bucking, bolting, aggression, all of those things you'd want to check out with the vet first and perhaps talk to a behaviour consultant. But there's some things, there's some signs, like if they're chewing the fence line, they're probably lacking the opportunities to chew as much as they need. Or if there's loads of mud up and down one fence, then you can be pretty sure they're probably pacing at some point. And if you went to a zoo and you saw an animal pacing, you'd be like, oh, the welfare's bad here. But in a equestrian setting, we seem to ignore it. But it's good to pay attention to these things. And then there's lots of little things, but if there's any new behaviour or there's anything where you think actually they don't seem relaxed. And
what about if our horses are happy? So if our horses maybe, because it's very subtle, isn't it? If we're not picking up on the fact that they're unhappy, what signs will they show us that they are really happy and thriving in the situation that we've set up?
So signs that they're happy. Usually they're bit more willing to do things. You can just tell a relaxed horse, they're not on edge all the time. There's also a chance if they're out in a herd and they're just happily playing and doing mutual grooming, and they're able to sleep properly, so they can sleep lying flat out in the field. Horses take it in turns to sleep, while others watch over. So if they're kept on their own, they can't do that, or they might not feel comfortable to do that. So it's important that they get that sleep. So if they're well rested, they'll probably perform better in whatever you're doing with them. And then there's also there's a pain ethogram of horses, but also you can the similarities with stress as well, with the shape of their eyes. There's some stuff I think is,
and sometimes it is just taking the time to tune into our horses, because I think we can all be guilty of, busy work schedules, social lives. We've got to build in family time. We've got to rush to this appointment and get that done. We need to exercise the horses to make sure they're back out. But actually booking in that time, if we have to just stand in the field and watch them and enjoy them and sit with them maybe. So for example, the other day, I thought I'm going to take just 20 minutes with my mum. I thought we'd do a little walk around the field, and we noticed that alongside the track, there's a big tree alongside the track that we wanted to include in the system, so that they had that natural shade and shelter. And that in amongst all the crevices of the bark was Winnie, my 15-hand Connemara cross, all her fur, where her summer coat's thickening up again and coming through again and losing that coat again in that late summer coat change shift. And she's itched it out like Baloo the bear from Jungle Book into the tree. And you can see, I've not caught her doing it yet, but you can see the evidence left behind that's been wedged in the little bits of bark and is sticking out from the tree. But sign that she's been having a whale of a time and enjoying herself when we're not there.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And also the hair that you're leaving on that tree is obviously going to be used by birds for their nests. It's really awesome that we're finally thinking outside the box. Some of us, and I would love it if more people thought like that and just spend a bit of time. A lot of it is just standing in the field. That's what I would do if I'm going out on a consultation. I'm going to spend a few minutes just staring at the whole picture and just soaking in what it feels like. Looking. Are there bird species?
And it's fun for us. I think it's ingrained in us from a young age, or whatever age that you start riding, whether it's friends' horses or a riding school or on holiday, trekking. We're so used to thinking that actually the exercise part, the riding or the training, is the enjoyment and is the activity. But actually sometimes just being with our horses when they're at rest or at play in the field and taking time to walk along with them and investigate what they've been up to is just as fun and rewarding as being out and about with them and doing exciting things that we've done, that we always hope to do with our horses. Also wondering, talking along the lines of track systems, Annabelle, what other ways are there to keep our horses other than a circular paddock or a square paddock on the land? So for those who don't know, track systems came into our being or came into our realm in the UK in about 2017 or a bit before, but they're a US construct in the hope that actually you're creating more of a natural environment for horses that encourage movement. What other options are there for us as horse owners?
Yeah, so track systems, I think it's really brilliant that they've started to catch on, because our horses need more than just these square little paddocks. But there are other options. I like to think of it as you can cherry pick from these systems. So there's a few other different styles of doing things. There's also aquaculture, which I really like and I'm a bit involved with. It's sort of looking at nurturing your soil and thinking like a grass farmer rather than a horse owner. But in some places that might not work. So I think we need to not get stuck in one particular style of doing things and thinking, actually, I can't do a full track, or maybe I don't want to put in a full track because I want more grass. Or if you want to do aquaculture, but you think, actually, I don't know how to get it set up right, so you can introduce mini tracks between areas. So it's about picking out bits that you want, and it can take a lot of time to study all of that, so I hope that I can help people get to that decision quicker, because it takes time to put these things in place, and it takes time for the ground to heal and grass to grow. Sometimes you go through a phase of some weird plants coming up and you think, oh, have I doing this right? But actually, if you commit to it, the following months and years, it's sort of a snowball effect. It just gets better and better if you've got it right in the first place.
And you mentioned
set it
earlier,
up for success.
a quick way to add enrichment to our horses' paddocks and tracks, take them out for hedgerow foraging walks and letting them explore, and then also bringing some of that foraging aspect in bushes and hedgerows back to our paddocks with your help and assistance. What do you make of paddock enrichment toys that are on the market? Things like balls and swinging toys from trees. Do you think that it's worth going along those lines and buying toys and enrichment products, or can it all be found in the landscape ourselves?
Like with everything, I think it's a balance. These toys can be good, but if you've got millions in your fields, then they're maybe not so helpful. And it's also important to introduce them carefully to your horse. There's a concept called flooding, where you sort of expose a horse to something that they're frightened of until they stop reacting, and actually that's not helpful to the horse. They could just still be frightened of it, but they've just learned not to react to it. So it's important to make sure that they're really comfortable with these toys, and also that they're safe. They're not going to accidentally ingest bits of rubber or whatever. But also they can be really useful if you've got a horse on box rest, or you have to keep them in a stable because that's what your yard wants you to do. But there are really really cool other options that are actually a lot cheaper than buying toys. You can use different flavoured teas, like peppermint tea, to dunk some hay in, and hang them up in different places, have different herbs around and about. There's a bit of a fashion in the children raising world, which I am deeply in at the minute, of rotating toys so they're not overwhelmed with all different toys at once. And I think that could probably translate over to horses. Maybe it's good to rotate what they've got, so they've got a little bit of novelty in their lives. Because it's really important that we think it's not just that hour or two that we're training with our horse. There's all that other time that you've got.
And we know that you emphasise support and project management. Can you share a success story where your guidance, your advice and support has led to a significant improvement in both horses' welfare and behaviour, and also the ecological health of a paddock and the land?
So at the moment, because I've only just started up, everything's a bit of a work in progress at the minute. But I'm working on a really cool couple of ones. There's one where there's some quite rare birds nesting. So we're working on setting it up so the birds still have their habitat, but the owners can still get what they want from the land, and the horses can still get enough grass, because at the minute there's more other plants rather than grass. And then in one of my previous roles in consultancy, ecological consultancy, there was a massive housing project that I was involved with, and we moved thousands and thousands of newts and toads and the little creatures, as many as we could, in little bucket traps, and we relocated them over to this sort of purpose-built, it's called a mitigation area, so a sort of an untouched area that's specifically for all the creatures that have been displaced by the housing. And it was really magical just seeing that just come to life, because I was working there for a very long time, and just watching things just get better and better the more we put into it. So we'd installed some ponds, and you could see the wildlife and the flowers slowly starting to come up. It was old farmland, so it was all this cracked, muddy ground.
Wow, that's absolutely phenomenal. And just thinking about your job as well, Annabelle, you must have to be so diplomatic, not only talking to us as horse owners and helping people sort of find new ways to keep their horses, but also dealing with yard managers and landowners who might not necessarily feel the same way as the horse owners do about how they should be kept. How do you deal with situations where owners are coming to you and saying, the yard manager or the landowner doesn't understand. They want the horses to be, inside their stables for the majority of the day or for 12 hours a day. There's reduced turnout. How do you kind of help juggle the personalities, the different opinions and experiences of those who actually might sort of lay law down in terms of the land?
Yeah, so that one's really tricky. It's hard to get through to some people sometimes, but I think it's important to do baby steps. It's not, I'm not going to muscle in and say, you need to put in a surface track and do this and put in these plants, because it's going to alienate people. So, yeah, it's baby steps. It's showing the benefits, educating about what it can look like if you just do tiny little tweaks. And quite a lot of farmers now, you pick up a Farmers Weekly magazine 10 years ago and it's all about machinery and things, and now there's so much more about the environment and regenerative farming and looking after the soil, and I think a lot of people are waking up to that, and so I think it's just about educating, taking little baby steps and not going in thinking you are wrong, I am right. It's about finding a balance, and it's the same with the conservation world and the horse world, butting heads over certain things, ragwort in particular, and a few other plants, and they're quite often they're using the same evidence for each side of the argument. So it's about looking at the evidence and just finding what works for everyone, and looking at the data and realising...
Yes, and I imagine you're always staying up to date on the latest research and having to stay in tune with what's going on around you, as well as working with your clients. And if I'm just touching on the ragwort argument, it's so hard, isn't it, as horse owners, as having this poisonous plant on our land that we want to get rid of because it might harm our horses. But also I know, because on the marshland we have lots of ragwort, we try and keep it into the sort of bushes of the strips of land that we keep for wildlife, like the muntjac and the barn owls at the far corner of the marsh. But we have a huge butterfly population, and that's where we think they're, breeding and feeding, and when we always feel torn from getting rid of our ragwort for our horses and leaving it for the butterflies. What do we do? How do we help, keep it in balance, and how do we manage this ragwort?
Yeah, so ragwort is, I see constant arguments about it on the internet. I think the facts are it is poisonous to horses, and we need to just accept that is the fact. There are laws that we need to remove it, but we can prevent its growth by actually setting up the ground for success. So you're not giving the ragwort these opportunities to grow. At the moment, how we keep our horses is just like throwing the doors open and saying, come on in, ragwort. You don't need to do that. You can manage it so other plants are there instead of the ragwort. You might still get the occasional bit, but it's about managing it so it doesn't come along. And also, if you've got enough grass and you've got enough other grazing, unless you're using it for hay, obviously definitely pull it out if it's being used for hay. But if you're not, horses don't tend to go for it. It's got a very bitter taste, so they don't tend to go for it. Pull it out if you see it, but obviously if you can prevent it growing, that's even better, and you can prevent it growing and support wildlife at the same time.
I have that intense hatred, but I also have that internal war when I'm pulling it out and I can see all the butterflies around me. Real internal struggle, that one, Annabelle, I have to say. You mentioned earlier climate change, and I think we all feel quite powerless as horse owners with climate change, and a lot of the time we're so worried about our horses and what they're doing, we kind of, it goes to the back of our minds.
Yeah, so I'm putting together a little free guide that will cover a little bit of that, because I think it is really easy to feel helpless with all this doom and gloom in the media. It feels like it's our own fault all the time, and then you sort of think, oh, well, I can't really do anything, and you get in this cycle. So I just want to say that it's not your fault individually. It's a big sort of political issue, it's these big businesses that are polluting all the time, water companies, fuel companies. But at the same time, any little thing that you do will make a difference, even if you don't feel like it is.
And what
even
role
just the
do
tiniest
native plants, you mentioned using plants within the land, but do native plants and biodiversity play in creating a healthier ecosystem for horses and wildlife?
The better the biodiversity, the more resilient it is to climate change, and also the more it's contributing to slowing it down. You're giving homes for so many different animals and insects and plants. There might be seeds in your soil that you don't know about that just need the right conditions to bloom, and you might have some rare plants that are desperately in need of growing and supporting insects. So
it's really interesting, isn't it? Because hearing you talk about baby steps and little bits of difference, where we rent this piece of marshland and we've got our track system that we try and rotate around as much as we can, we always leave an area of the marsh that's the long grass. We aim to keep a little bit of ragwort in there for the butterflies. And there are hares in there and muntjac, and there's a barn owl that we love coming to watch at dusk, and he hunts and he swoops down into the long grass and picks things up. There's moles and mole hills. It's the most incredible sight to see the horses grazing alongside all of these different wildlife species that we'd never seen up close before, because we moved from Kent, very highly populated county, very busy, to Suffolk, which seems to be a little bit more wild, and the nature seems to be thriving more in Suffolk than it certainly was in Kent in our experience. And it's amazing because previously this marshland had always been kept so that the grass was short and sort of neat and smart, but we always try to keep an area of it long for the animals, for the wildlife, and just watching it come alive with creatures has been incredible. And also we hope that encourages the horses to live a more natural life, and that they get the enjoyment of sharing the land with critters other than the little herd that we have.
Yeah, definitely. I think I used to do a bit of forest bathing, and it's so beneficial to people. And there's all this green prescribing, doctors prescribing time outside, and it must be similar in horses. It plays into that enrichment for them to interact with wildlife and things, and have it around them must be good for their health. I'd be really interested to see any research in that. I don't know if there is any, but it'd be really cool to find out how that affects horses, because it's really important for nature and for us as well. You feel so much better when you hear a bird sing. I remember
really you're so right. It is those little things that keep us going in the hardest of times, and how often, even if we haven't got a hospital stay, but how often, if we've had a stressful day, does a walk help us sort of channel those emotions and feelings, and just getting outside, wherever it might be, out into the green space to just let loose, sort of harking back to the times when it was the only thing that we had, when we didn't have technology and TVs and phones and emails, and nature in our paddocks. What about the plants? What plants can we actually plant ourselves? So if we don't have sort of naturally spawning plants popping up and hedgerows sort of rich at the side of the borders of the field, what can we actually put in and plant ourselves, Annabelle, for the horses?
So you can put in hedgerows instead of your fencing around the edge. There's actually some grant schemes out there to help with the cost of that. You can also, I saw a really cool thing at a equestrian centre that I visited recently that's doing a lot of rewilding stuff. And they've put in living fence posts, so trees that have been put into the ground and then sort of screwed in the electric fencing into the trees, and it's not harming the tree, but the fence is living, which is really cool. There's also the ancient art of hedge laying, which can turn your hedge into a beautiful fence. There's a lot of wildlife trust sort of places or local conservation charities that do courses on that, so you could learn to do it yourself. How cool would that be? And then if you can't do any of these really cool things, you could also make like a little browsing garden for your horse. So you could get various herbs and plants that you could grow in a little area. I've got on my Instagram and Facebook, I've got some safe plants. I usually do like a plant spotlight every few days. And you can put in some of these plants and you could either pick them for your horse, or if you're into destruction, you could take your horse in there, but they might try and eat everything. But yeah, you could give them all this free choice selection, which would be really good for them, because there's sort of this area of called zoopharmacognosy, I think it was called, that horses self-select different plants and herbs and things to help themselves with
it's also
different
fun
illnesses.
for us as owners to watch the horses exploring the plants, as well as enriching a horse's life, isn't it? Because I remember, and this has really stuck with me, it must have been about 3 years ago now, 3 summers ago, that like my little miniature horse Diesel that I own with my mum, he was in his summer turnout paddock, which we always have restricted element of grass, and it's a bit sort of more of a rocky terrain, and lower quality grass, less sugary. And on the sort of hill with lots of sows, thistles would grow. And I never thought anything of it, because thistles would appear. I know they weren't harmful to the horses. I thought they never ate them anyway. And one time I put them back in their paddock, and I saw him go over to the thistle, get his tiny little miniature hoof, dig up the thistle. So he was actually digging it out of the ground with his little hoof. And then he picked it up between his teeth and really carefully ate this purple and green thistle, sort of little stem by stem, leaf by leaf, avoiding anything that's spiky and crunching it down if it was. And it was the most hilarious and fascinating thing that I've ever seen in my life. I was transfixed. That image will never leave me. But it just goes to show you that they might be having laughs and getting something tasty to eat and a real treat for them. But also, it's very entertaining for us as the owners to see our horses behaving in new and different ways.
Yeah, definitely. And you think that must be really good for his mind to figure out problem solving, and you think how satisfying it is when you've successfully prepared a meal, or you've got like a new tricky fruit and you've figured out how to get it out and you've got every last little tasty morsel. It must be the same for them, that satisfaction of getting every tasty bit from a plant. And yeah, thistles, loads of benefits to thistles. Not all horses go for them because they are quite prickly. But yeah, no, that's really cool. How cute.
Oh,
I'm trying to think, but I know they've got some minerals in them. Trying to think off the top of my head. I'm doing a plant spotlight on them soon. Keep an eye out for my plant spotlight.
yeah, I will. I will keep an eye out for your guides. I'm really intrigued as to why he went for it. But I swear he is the most clever of the herd of 3 horses that we have. Our little American miniature Diesel. He's very sharp and very on it, and always has been since he was a foal. So it doesn't surprise me that he's the one navigating and negotiating the prickles and, and the thorns of the thistle, because he knows what he's doing. He's a very smart little boy, that's for sure. Transitioning from conventional land management is daunting to eco-friendly options. Can you prevent overwhelming ourselves and our horses at the same time?
Yeah, so I think it's good to sort of first get it clear in your head what you actually want from it all, because there's no point going down one route and then trying to undo what you've done, or not fully understanding what you're doing and then ending up with loads of rank grass with nettles and weeds, and you think, what the hell have I done? So I'd say start with one paddock or one area. Then if you mess it up, it's not the whole place. You haven't ruined everything. You've just got one area that you've experimented with. You can study these courses, you can read these books, or I can jump in and then teach you it all from scratch, or just teach you the bits that you need to know for your particular bit of land. But basically the idea is you sort of look at what you've got already, look at the plants you've already got, like like a botanical survey, which I can do, or you can go out there and learn it, or you can get some help, and then look at the soil, get your soil tested, see what your soil is lacking or has too much of, and that's sort of your baseline. Then you can look at what does it need, what doesn't it need, and then you can figure out how you can use your horses to help you with that. Do you need to take them off that paddock to rest it so the grass can grow, so you can actually see what's there, and see what comes up where. And then it snowballs, and the more you learn, the more you're like, oh, this works, that doesn't work for me. All of it just plays in together. But yeah, don't be afraid to experiment in small areas. And
get to grips with it as well, because it does take a lot of time and management. I know from me and my mum, who have our little herd together on the track, it's taken, I dread to think, days, probably weeks of solid time setting up the fencing, moving it, rotating it. So it is an investment as well, isn't it? We know that although it's going to take a lot of our time and a lot of our effort and actually a lot of graft and muscle work, it is going to benefit our horses and ultimately, hopefully, make our lives and their lives a lot easier in the long run, instead of thinking about turning out and then taking back in again and mucking out stables. Actually, we're putting that time into the land around us.
Definitely, yeah. You're saving money in the long run, and you're saving time in the long run. It's a long game rather than a quick fix. It can take a long time for the ground to balance out, but if you think about it in long terms, if you've got this all set up, then you don't have to be mucking out stables, like you say. You're not spending all that money on bedding. Bedding prices seem to be skyrocketing constantly. And hard feed costs, and then on the environmental side, you're saving on all those single-use plastics that wrap up the bedding and the feeds. It's if you can think long term with it, it does pay off.
And education is key, as we know, listening to you and hearing all of your expertise and your tips and tricks that are going to get us through. But how do you work to raise awareness and educate horse owners about the importance of sustainable land management?
So I post like mad on social media with my little plant spotlights and my reels that quite often involve the Crocs that I'm wearing or my child screeching in the background. But I hope it's like little snippets of education. But there is also chances to actually get quite deep into it. There's the Equine course. There's links that I've got on my social media and things, where you can, if you have the time and the energy to study it, you can get right deep into understanding it all. And then I'm hoping to sort of like here, talk on podcasts, go and talk in places where people might not be thinking about that sort of thing. So like in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to speak on a panel at the Blenheim Horse Trials. So I'm hoping to reach some slightly different audiences there. Come and say hello if you are going. I'll be on the Beyond the Stable stage. And yeah, just sort of trying to inform people. I think it's becoming more and more on people's radars, and I think if we carry on managing the horses how we do, there's likely to be some kind of legislation coming into play, because it is really degrading the land. But on the flip side of that, I think there may be incentives to manage our land better that will come out of this, which would be really exciting, and I'm hoping to keep a finger on the pulse for all of those and help people achieve what they need to be able to receive the funding from those things, or the support or whatever is going to be provided. I'm hoping to be able to help people get that.
Well, Annabelle, it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing so many gems and so much of your expertise to help us all get started on our land management for both the environment around us and for our horses' welfare. We've got some great first steps